The most produced motor vehicle in human history is not a Toyota, it is not a Ford, it is not even close to anything you have probably ever considered. It is a 110 cubic centimeter Honda motorcycle that costs less than a single American car payment, and it has quietly become the economic backbone of a region with 700 million people. The Honda Super Cub and its modern descendants have sold over 110 million units since 1958. To put that in perspective, the Volkswagen Beetle sold 21.5 million. The Toyota Corolla has moved about 50 million. The Ford F-Series, America's best-selling vehicle for over 4 decades, sits around 40 million. The Super Cub beats all 3 of them combined, and the average American has never even heard of it. But here is where this story gets truly wild. The title of this video mentions a $3,000 bike. That is actually the American price. The real price in Southeast Asia is even more shocking. The best-selling variant, the Honda Wave Alpha 110, retails for approximately $790 in Vietnam. In Indonesia, the Honda Beat starts at around $1,150. The $3,899 Super Cub C125 that Honda sells in America is roughly 5 times what the same engineering philosophy costs in Hanoi. So why are Americans paying 5 times more for access to the most successful vehicle design in human history? And why do 700 million people in Southeast Asia consider this little motorcycle as essential as electricity? Let's find out. The story begins in 1958 Japan, and it starts with noodles. Honda's co-founder Takeo Fujisawa had a vision that had nothing to do with racing or performance or any of the things we normally associate with motorcycle culture. He walked up to Soichiro Honda and said something that would change history. "If you can design a small motorcycle with a cover to hide the engine, I can sell it. Every soba noodle shop in Japan will want one for deliveries." That was the brief. Not speed, not power. A bike that a delivery boy could ride with one hand while balancing a tray of noodles in the other. Women in skirts could step through the low frame without any awkwardness. Buddhist monks in robes could ride it to temple. Fujisawa wanted a motorcycle that everyone could use, not just motorcycle people. Soichiro Honda took this challenge and created something revolutionary for 1958. First, he used a 4-stroke engine when literally everyone else was using 2 strokes. This quadrupled power output while dramatically cutting fuel consumption. The bike would sip gas instead of gulping it. Second, Chief Engineer Akima spent months developing a centrifugal clutch. He built 8 separate designs before finally nailing it. This eliminated the intimidating hand lever that scared away novice riders. You could literally learn to ride this thing in minutes. Third, Honda borrowed plastic leg shields from a failed scooter project, creating a clean look that protected riders' clothes from road grime and engine heat. The result was a vehicle so elegant and reliable that over 1,000 units sold on launch day. Within 2 years, Honda was producing 564,000 Super Cubs annually and had built the largest motorcycle factory in the world at Suzuka. The production milestones tell the story of compound dominance that nobody else has ever matched. The Super Cub hit 5 million cumulative units in 1967. It reached 50 million by late 2005, becoming the first motor vehicle in history to hit that number. In October 2017, Honda held a ceremony at their Kumamoto factory to celebrate 100 million units. Honda's president stood at that ceremony and made a pledge. They said they would keep the Super Cub alive until it reaches 200 million. As of 2024, the count exceeds 110 million units. These bikes are manufactured at 16 plants across 15 countries and sold in over 160 nations. Honda's total motorcycle production across all models hit 500 million in May 2025. But the Super Cub did not stay frozen in 1958. The family tree branched out across Southeast Asia starting in the 1980s, adapting to local markets while keeping the core DNA intact. In Thailand, it became the Honda Dream in 1986. In the 1990s, the Honda Wave series modernized the platform with plastic body panels over a steel tube frame. Vietnam got the Wave Alpha in 2002, and it became an instant national sensation. Indonesia got the Honda Beat in 2008, an automatic scooter that absolutely conquered the archipelago. Different names, different body styles, same philosophy that Fujisawa articulated back in 1958: cheap, reliable, indestructible. Now we need to talk about the scale of motorcycle dependency in Southeast Asia, because these numbers are genuinely difficult to process if you have only ever lived in America. There are approximately 250 million motorcycles in the ASEAN region. That is not a typo. Motorcycles account for roughly 80% of all vehicles on the road across this part of the world. Let me break this down country by country. Vietnam has 77 million registered motorcycles for approximately 100 million people. That works out to 770 motorcycles per 1,000 residents, one of the highest rates on Earth. Motorcycles account for 95% of vehicles on the road and 85 to 90% of actual traffic. In Ho Chi Minh City alone, over 5 million motorcycles flood the streets every single day. Indonesia has around 112 million motorcycles for 280 million people. 85% of households own at least one. The country is the third largest motorcycle market globally, selling 6.33 million new units in 2024. That is more in a single month than the United States sells in an entire year. Thailand has approximately 21.6 million motorcycles, with 87% of households owning at least one. Bangkok's iconic orange-vested motorcycle taxi drivers number around 180,000, operating from roughly 3,000 fixed stations, transporting over 2 million passengers daily in the capital alone. The Philippines has about 7.3 million registered motorcycles, plus an estimated 1.6 million motorized tricycles. These motorcycle with sidecar vehicles serve as primary public transport in 1,500 of the country's 1,600 municipalities. In places where roads are too narrow for cars or buses, the motorcycle is the only option. Malaysia has around 14.9 million motorcycles for 33 million people, roughly 452 per 1,000 residents. Now here is the comparison that makes this real. The United States has 8.8 million registered motorcycles for 335 million people. That is a mere 26 motorcycles per 1,000 residents. Vietnam's motorcycle density is 30 times higher than America's, and most Americans have no idea this world even exists. Honda's grip on these markets borders on something that would make antitrust lawyers uncomfortable if it were happening in America. The company holds 83% market share in Vietnam, 77% in Indonesia, and 78% in Thailand. In Vietnam, Honda's dominance is so total that the word Honda became a genericized trademark. Vietnamese people say Z Honda to mean any motorcycle, regardless of who actually made it. It is the same thing Americans do when they say Xerox for photocopies or Band-Aid for adhesive bandages. When your brand name becomes the generic word for an entire product category, you have achieved a level of market penetration that most companies can only dream about. Honda Vietnam alone sold 2.3 million motorcycles in fiscal year 2025. But here is where this story transforms from impressive business success into something much bigger. These motorcycles are not just transportation, they have become the literal infrastructure on which entire economies run. Let me tell you about Gojek. In 2010, a company launched in Jakarta with 20 motorcycle drivers and a phone hotline. The name comes from Ojek, the Indonesian word for motorcycle taxi. You would call the hotline, request a ride, and one of those 20 drivers would come pick you up. That company is now worth billions of dollars. Gojek grew into a super app with over 2 million drivers, more than 20 different services, including ride-hailing, food delivery, courier services, mobile payments, and shopping. The app has been downloaded 170 million times. In 2021, Gojek merged with Tokopedia to form GoTo. And here is the number that should blow your mind. A study by the University of Indonesia found that the GoTo ecosystem contributed between 349 and 428 trillion Indonesian rupiah to the Indonesian economy in 2022. That is equivalent to 1.8 to 2.2% of the nation's entire GDP. A motorcycle-based platform generating economic output equivalent to a mid-sized country. Fortune magazine named Gojek one of the 50 companies that changed the world. They did it twice. The multiplier effects cascade outward in ways that transform communities. 86% of GoFood restaurant partners reported at least a 5% increase in sales after joining the platform. 33% of small businesses opened new branches because of the additional revenue. During COVID-19, when 3.7 million Indonesians lost their jobs, many turned to Gojek as their lifeline. 40% of new food merchants who joined had zero prior business experience. The motorcycle did not just move people. It created an entirely new category of economic participation. A GoRide driver in Jakarta earns roughly $245 to $315 per month. That means the motorcycle pays for itself in 3 to 5 months, then generates pure income after that, an $800 investment that creates a sustainable livelihood. In Bangkok, the motorcycle taxi economy is its own fascinating world. Each orange vest, the distinctive uniform of Bangkok's Motosai drivers, represents a licensed station position that can cost between 50,000 and 300,000 Thai baht, that is $1,400 to $8,500 for the right to operate from a specific location. Think about that for a second. The license to drive a motorcycle taxi in a busy Bangkok neighborhood can cost more than the motorcycle itself, 7 times more in some cases. Anthropologist Claudio Sopranzetti documented the political significance of these drivers in his book, Owners of the Map. During Thailand's red shirt protests, motorcycle taxi drivers served as reconnaissance and cavalry for demonstrators. They are not just workers, they are a political force. Motorbike couriers in Jakarta complete deliveries up to 40% faster than four-wheeled vehicles during peak hours. Last mile delivery, which accounts for 53% of overall logistics expenses, is almost entirely motorcycle dependent across the region. When you order something on Shopee or Lazada in Southeast Asia, a motorcycle brings it to your door. So here is the obvious question: why does America not have access to this? The Honda Wave Alpha is not sold in the United States. Neither is the Honda Beat, the Honda Click, nor any of the models costing under $1,500 that dominate Southeast Asia. The reasons form a mutually reinforcing cycle of regulation, culture, infrastructure, and economics that has essentially locked Americans out of the most practical transportation solution ever invented. Let us start with regulatory costs. Every motorcycle sold in the United States must meet Environmental Protection Agency emissions standards, which are stricter than many Southeast Asian requirements. They must also meet Department of Transportation Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. In California, they face even tougher California Air Resources Board standards on top of everything else. The engineering, testing, and certification costs for each model are substantial, and those costs are nearly impossible to justify on a $1,500 bike with thin margins and uncertain demand. Honda does sell the Super Cub C125 ABS in America for $3,899, but it comes loaded with an anti-lock braking system, LED lighting, smart key ignition, and fuel injection. All of those features inflate the price to roughly 5 times what a Wave Alpha costs in Vietnam. The regulatory burden alone makes affordable motorcycles essentially illegal in America. Then there is the infrastructure problem. A 110 cubic centimeter Honda Wave tops out at about 55 miles per hour. United States interstate highways have minimum speeds of 40 to 45 miles per hour, and traffic actually flows at 65 to 80 miles per hour or more. Suburban sprawl means most American commutes require at least some highway travel. A bike that cannot safely maintain highway speeds is essentially useless for most American transportation needs. Only California fully allows lane splitting, the practice where motorcycles filter between stopped or slow-moving cars. In most states, motorcycles sit in traffic just like cars, eliminating the key advantage that makes them indispensable in Bangkok or Jakarta. Add cold winters across much of the country, and year-round riding becomes impractical for hundreds of millions of Americans. But the biggest barrier might be cultural. The average American motorcycle costs around $12,000. That is roughly 15 times a Honda Wave Alpha. 82% of American riders use their bikes for recreation. Only 38% commute on them. Cruisers and touring bikes dominate U.S. registrations. Harley-Davidson, with its big displacement ethos and lifestyle branding, holds roughly 27% of the American market. The trend toward larger displacement has actually intensified in recent years. Touring bike sales grew 14.7% in the first quarter of 2024. Americans do not buy motorcycles to save money. They buy them to feel something. And perhaps the most damning comparison of all, for $2,000 to $3,000, an American can buy a used car that carries a family, handles all weather, and works on every road. That makes a $2,000 motorcycle feel like a poor value proposition for transportation in a country designed entirely around the automobile. Honda has made some progress. The Honda Navi, a $1,999, 109 cubic centimeter mini moto, has become one of the best-selling motorcycles in America since its 2022 introduction. But these are positioned as fun recreational vehicles, not daily transportation. Now let me share some numbers that I think should make Americans genuinely uncomfortable about how we have chosen to organize our transportation system. A Honda Wave gets roughly 150 miles per gallon. The average American car gets 26 miles per gallon. That means $1 of gasoline moves you 43 miles on a Wave versus just 7.4 miles in the average American sedan. The Wave goes 5.8 times farther per dollar of fuel. Scale that up to a full year. If the average American drives 13,500 miles annually, a car burns through roughly $1,817 in fuel. A Honda Wave would cost $315. That is an annual savings of roughly $1,500 on fuel alone. The total annual cost of ownership for a Honda Wave in Southeast Asia, including purchase price amortized over 10 years, fuel, insurance at around $10 to $50 per year, and maintenance at roughly $50 to $100 per year, comes to approximately $300 to $400 annually. AAA estimates the average American car costs between $12,000 and $15,000 per year to own and operate. Here is a stat that probably belongs in the opening of any conversation about American transportation. A Honda Wave Alpha's entire purchase price in Vietnam, roughly $790, is less than a single monthly car payment for many Americans. The average new car payment in 2024 is around $730 per month. A Vietnamese worker can buy the country's most popular motorcycle for roughly 1 month's average salary. An American needs about 10 months of median income for an average new car. On carbon emissions, the Honda Wave produces approximately 59 grams of carbon dioxide per mile versus 342 grams for the average American car. That is an 83% reduction in emissions. If America's 130 million car commuters hypothetically switched to Honda Cubs, the nation would save approximately $195 billion annually in fuel costs and slash commuter carbon emissions by more than 4/5. Obviously, that is completely impractical given American infrastructure and climate, but the math illustrates just how absurdly inefficient our transportation system really is. Let me share a few stories from the Super Cub's history that I think perfectly capture why this bike became what it is. During the Vietnam War, Honda exported 750,000 Super Cubs to South Vietnam between 1967 and 1969. Orders sometimes exceeded 10,000 units per day, forcing Japanese headquarters to verify they had counted the right number of zeros on the order forms. When Saigon fell in 1975 and the United States imposed a 16-year economic embargo, Vietnam could not import new bikes or parts. But the Super Cubs already there just kept running. For over a decade and a half without factory support, without spare parts, without technical assistance, the Vietnamese experienced firsthand the bike's legendary durability. Mechanics learned to fabricate replacement components. Riders learned to keep ancient machines alive through sheer ingenuity. This experience cemented both the motorcycle's reputation and the cultural reflex to call every motorcycle a Honda. When your transportation survives an embargo through pure engineering quality, you remember the brand forever. 3 months after the original 1958 launch, customer complaints about slipping clutches poured into Honda headquarters. This happened right before a major Japanese holiday, the worst possible timing. Honda's response defined the company's character. They mobilized salesmen and factory workers to visit every affected customer personally during their vacation. Technicians repaired bikes on site, in driveways and parking lots, on what should have been their time off. This commitment to customer service when things go wrong is part of why the brand commands such loyalty across Asia. Here is a fun one. The Beach Boys wrote Honda a free commercial and never asked for a penny. In 1964, the Beach Boys recorded a song called Little Honda. It was not a paid placement. They just genuinely loved the bike. A cover version by a group called the Hondells became a top 10 hit. Meanwhile, Honda's advertising team was running a campaign called "You Meet the Nicest People on a Honda." The slogan actually originated as a class assignment by a UCLA advertising student. Gray Advertising discovered it and bought the rights. The campaign transformed American attitudes toward motorcycles. Before this, bikes were associated with outlaws and troublemakers, the Marlon Brando Wild One image. Honda repositioned motorcycles as friendly, approachable, mainstream transportation. U.S. motorcycle imports went from 6,300 units in 1959 to 148,000 by 1963. Honda captured over 50% of the American market by 1964. And then there is the world's fastest Cub. In August 2019, Japanese artisans took a modified Super Cub to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. They fitted a miniaturized turbocharger, a world first at that scale, to an engine based on a 50cc design that was half a century old. The bike, nicknamed the Orange Tuna, hit 165 kilometers per hour, or 103 miles per hour, on a platform originally designed to deliver noodles. They won 6 speed titles at Bonneville with a souped-up noodle delivery bike. The Super Cub's future faces its first existential challenge. Japan's stricter emissions regulations, effective November 2025, will end production of 50cc motorcycles. Honda released a limited edition final model in December 2024 to mark the end of an era. The 110cc variants continue, but the original displacement class is dying. More significantly, electric motorcycles are circling. Honda positioned 2024 as the first year of global expansion of electric motorcycles. The company plans to introduce 30 or more electric models by 2030, targeting 3.5 million electric units annually, which would be 15% of total sales. But in Southeast Asia, Honda faces unfamiliar competition in the electric space. Chinese brands Yedia and Aima are entering the electric market aggressively. In Vietnam, local brand VinFast and Chinese Yedia already dominate electric two-wheeler sales. Honda barely registers in the electric vehicle segment. Still, the internal combustion Super Cub ecosystem is not going anywhere soon. Honda set all-time motorcycle sales records in 37 countries in calendar year 2024, selling 20.7 million units globally. That is a new record. A Vietnamese study concluded that 56 to 89% of urban citizens will still prioritize motorbikes through 2030, with less than 1% opting for public transport. The tipping point from motorcycles to cars correlates with rising gross domestic product per capita, and most of Southeast Asia remains firmly in motorcycle territory. Honda's president pledged at the 100 million ceremony to keep the Super Cub alive until it reaches 200 million. At current production rates of roughly 3.2 million Super Cub family units per year, that milestone arrives somewhere around 2050. He pledged to keep the line going. By then, the little bike that Soichiro Honda designed for noodle delivery boys will have produced more units than many countries have people. Still running on the same basic promise it made in 1958. Get on, go anywhere, never break down. So what does all of this mean for Americans watching this video? I am not going to sit here and tell you to sell your car and buy a Super Cub. For most Americans, that is genuinely impractical given how our cities and highways are designed. But I do think there is something worth reflecting on here. We have built a transportation system where the average American spends between $12,000 and $15,000 per year just to get around. A system where a monthly car payment often exceeds the entire purchase price of what 700 million people in Southeast Asia use as their primary transportation. We have created infrastructure where a $790 solution to mobility is essentially illegal to sell in its most affordable form. And we have developed a motorcycle culture that treats two wheels as expensive toys rather than practical tools. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, a Honda Wave is paying for itself in a few months and then generating income for families, creating billion-dollar platform economies, moving more people per dollar of fuel than anything in America. The Super Cub did not become the most produced vehicle in history because it was the fastest or the most powerful or the most prestigious. It got there by being exactly what its users needed: Cheap, reliable, indestructible. There is probably a lesson in that somewhere. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, you are going to want to see what happened when Japanese efficiency met American fast food culture. That video is on screen now. And if you want more stories about how the rest of the world solved problems America is still struggling with, hit subscribe. I cover this stuff every week. See you in the next one.